Kia ora koutou. Welcome. My name's Dave Petrie. I'm one of the career consultants with the careers team here at UC. Now I've been invited to talk with you guys about how to succeed in job interviews for teaching. And this will follow on from the session that I'm presenting on Monday on cover letters, CVs, and job search. So there'll be a little bit of overlapping connection there. Ideally, if you're nice and early looking at this, then I would suggest attending the CV session first, which will also be recorded for those who are unable to attend. So be with me for a moment while I do my screen sharing bit, and I'll just pull up a PowerPoint that we'll have a look at. Okay, so it should now be up on your screens as well. So the first thing with preparing for job interviews is to realize that there's actually no one perfect way, because all the employers that you encounter will be different, because all the schools have different approaches. The principals, the staff within it have different criteria that perhaps that they're applying, and different tricks and approaches that they use to select the best candidate for their particular school. But there are some things that they will have in common in terms of general processes. So generally, you'll be one of about 3 to 5 candidates that have successfully got through to the interview stage. Remember that if you get to an interview, it means that the employer actually likes you and think that you're a strong candidate for that role. So the purpose of the interview, as much as anything, is to figure out who's going to be the best fit for the school and who they're most going to want to work with on their team. Worth remembering as you think about your preparation. Typically, most interviews for teaching roles will last around 30 minutes, but some might be a bit longer if they include other components. It's not uncommon that there might be a practical teaching part or some kind of other practical exercise that you may have to do as part of that interview process. The number of people will also vary. Typically, it will be somewhere between about 3 and 5 max, usually around 2 or 3 on that panel. And it will consist of a few key players, such as the principal and or the deputy principal, some other staff member, head of department, etc., and maybe a board member. For secondary schools, you might even get a student rep on there. They will have already gone through and compared applications to find out who they think is going to be the best fit, and they might even have a bit of a loose ranking in their head. But when you get to the interview, it's pretty much a blank slate. So even those who perhaps got into the interview as a bit of an outsider, hey, this is your chance to shine. So it's now a level playing field, and things are at your disposal. It's up to you to make or break. The employer is going to have a number of criteria that they're using. Generally, they're looking at these key things. So your presentation, not just physically, in terms of your dress and that sort of thing, but also the attitude that you present, how keen you appear, whether you appear really motivated, enthusiastic, open and outgoing and confident, or whether you're a bit hesitant, a bit shy, maybe a bit terrified. So they'll be picking up on all of that quite quickly during the interview. They will also very quickly figure out whether, in fact, you've done your homework for the interview or not, and whether you know much about their school and their community or not. And we'll also be looking at the quality of your questions, which they again use as a bit of a gauge of that level of connection that you've already developed with the school. With your knowledge of the school, yeah, important to do some research, and we'll look at that very shortly. So as I kind of alluded to before, ultimately they're looking at the best fit for their particular team, for their school. And although the interview can seem a bit daunting, they're not trying to get you to fail in the interview. They're actually aiming to draw out the best from you so they can see how you perform to your best. So they will give you opportunities and they'll give you a bit of leeway for a bit of nervousness, because after all, who isn't nervous when you're going to an interview when you want that job? They're not so much looking for the perfect teacher. Instead, they realize that you're a beginning teacher. So they're looking at the person you're going to become as an educator as you continue with your professional development journey. What they're really looking for is your love, your passion for teaching and for working with the young people in their school. They're looking at your character and trying to gauge how that might line up with the character of their school. Obviously, the reputation of their school is important. They want to get somebody who is going to represent their school well in their community and who's going to fit well in that wider community as well. They'll be looking at your level of confidence in what you've already learned and what you're already able to do, but also in your ability to listen and to learn further from your colleagues. They're particularly interested in your ability to build relationships with the children in front of you, of course, but also with your parents, with your colleagues, with the wider community. And they're looking to see that you'll be fair in your dealings in those relationships and deal with people, equitably. Now, they're also concerned about your well-being. Now, principals have been a beginning teacher themselves. They know that to start off with, that first year in particular is an extremely stressful and demanding time. So they're looking to see that you're resilient enough to deal with that. They don't want somebody who's going to burn out in the first term. So they're looking to see that you've got a life outside of teaching, which will hopefully provide you with a bit of an outlet, a way of dealing with that stress, and some support structures so that you can be basically happy and well in a good place as you start your teaching journey. They're also looking at your extra value that you offer. Ultimately, when you start off as a teacher, you've got the same teaching qualification as all the other new beginning teachers. So why should that school hire you? What is it that you've got that will add additional value to this particular school? So they're very keen to find out about that. They're looking at your potential to grow as a teacher. And I will have mentioned this in the CV session. When they're looking at your CV, they're actually looking at the way you express yourself in the CV as evidence of your communication skills. There's no point saying that you've got great written communication skills and at the same time misspelling the words around it or having bad grammar when you try and introduce that. So in an interview, a similar thing is going on. They're looking at your ability to engage the interviewing panel. And if you can't engage those 3 or 4 people that are in front of you in the interview, how on earth are you going to engage and hold an audience of 30 odd kids or teenagers? So this is a test. They're looking at how you can connect with them, how you can engage them, how you can grab their interest. So how do we prepare for all of this? Well, prior to the interview, think about those practical things. Think about that first impression that you're going to be forming. Think about how you're going to dress in a way that's appropriate to their particular community and environment. All the schools are different, so make sure you've done your homework, you fully understand what they're about, what their culture is. Some will be very formal and you might need to go and dress in a more of a corporate approach. Others will be less formal. Don't turn up in jeans and t-shirt or in track pants if you're doing phys ed, but think about what's appropriate for that particular community and for that particular school. And as I said, don't just focus on the dress, but how you look when you come in terms of your facial expression, whether you're sort of exuding confidence or not, that can speak just as loudly as the package. So generally we have about 3 seconds to make a first impression. That's it, it's very quick. And within about 30 seconds, that's very much set in concrete. So all you can do in advance to manage that impression, the better it's going to be. Make sure you've reread the job description thoroughly so it's fresh in your mind what they're actually looking for. Reread your application before you go in. That might seem a bit weird, but it could well be that you've applied for a number of different jobs over a period of time. And it can be quite a long time, perhaps, between putting in your application and hearing that you've got an interview and going in for that interview. Sometimes a few weeks and sometimes quite a few different job applications in between. So it's very easy to get a bit confused about what you said to whom in particular applications. So reread what you've said to this school and make sure that you can then consistently reinforce those messages rather than accidentally contradicting yourself during the interview. Think about your key skills and abilities. Basically those key things that you want to leave with them. So if they forgot everything about you, what would be the 3 or 4 key points that you would want them to associate with your name? And it's way better, I think, to make those 3 or 4 points very well with evidence rather than trying to cover 8 or 9 things badly in a way that's almost instantly forgettable. So to do all of this, you need to have researched the school. So look on their website at the very least, look at the ERO report, that's pretty easily accessible. It's often on their website, and if not, you can go to ERO site and find it quite easily. Have a look through that, look at what they're good at, look at the areas that they're wanting to work on and develop further, and think about how you can contribute to both of those areas. Also, many principals have said that they're very open to having applicants contact them before they put in their written application. So I would strongly recommend perhaps ringing them up first and just expressing your interest in the role and asking if there might be an opportunity to come in and find out exactly how their school works before you apply. Now that's a win-win because it gives you an opportunity to find out about the school and whether that's going to be a fit for you. And it gives them the opportunity to find out a little bit about you and whether you look like a strong candidate or not. Now, one of the principal's biggest fears is that they take on somebody who seemed great, but after a few weeks or months, they leave because they've decided that the school is not a good fit for them for whatever reason. So this helps to put that fear to rest a little bit and is very positive for both parties. Now, some schools will be more open to this than others. You'll find that the rural schools, smaller schools, special character schools will probably be very open on that. Some of the bigger urban schools, maybe not so much, but there's no harm in asking. And even those that say no to that particular approach might incorporate some kind of a visit as part of the assessment process anyway. Have a chat with anybody that you know that might be connected to the school community, that might have students studying there. Basically, whatever you can find out about the school before you go in will help you to anticipate what's important to them, to figure out what sort of questions they might ask to find out about that, and to have good answers prepared to address them. Think about the questions you want to ask them too, because that can show a lot about your level of engagement with the job. So there's a few examples here of different questions that they might fire at you. You'll find somewhere on the Learn site a PDF that has a whole bunch of different questions and a few other tips to summarize some of the key points from this slide, from these slides as well. So make sure you have a look at that for a much more comprehensive list. But these are some of the common ones that might come up. As I said earlier, there may be a practical test of some sort, so don't be surprised, and it could take any manner of forms and shapes. They will likely ask a few questions of a few examples of what we call a behavioural question. So can you give me an example of when you taught such and such subject? Or give me an example of a situation where, tell us about a time when you had a disagreement with another team member, how you dealt with it. So those are classic examples of the behavioural interview question. It's a particular style. They won't be asking that accidentally. And there's also a particular approach that they will expect you to use when you're forming your answer. And that's outlined by an acronym that's commonly referred to as STAR. So STAR. S stands for talking about the situation, T, task, action, and result. So if you follow that formula, that will be giving them what they want. So what's behind the behavioural question is the assumption that your past behaviour is the best predictor of your future performance. So they're wanting a specific example of how you demonstrated that particular skill. Not just, so your answer is not just in that situation I would, it's in this situation I did. And that STAR formula will help you to present that very clearly. Just make sure that you spend the time in the areas that are going to be of most interest to them. So don't get too elaborate on the situation and the task. Some people spend a lot of time talking about that in an interview to the point that the future employer almost becomes an expert in somebody else's business practices or school management practices. They don't really care. What they're most interested in is what did you do and how well did it work? So make sure that your emphasis is on that action and result part of the STAR formula. These others are fairly predictable. So have a bit of a look through that additional worksheet and it will give you some more tips on that. One in particular is this, tell us about yourself. Often people do struggle with that because it's a very open question. The purpose of this really is so they can get a bit more of an insight into who you are as a person, as a human, because that's who they're hiring. And they can form a better idea of how you might fit with their team, with their school culture, with their students. So the more they can find out about you, the person, the better. So throughout the interview, don't be afraid to show that personality. As I say, they already like you based on your CV. They think you're one of the strongest candidates. So really, as much as anything, the purpose of the interview is to show them that you're the person they would like to work with. So make sure that you are genuine about yourself and that really comes to the fore. Sometimes who you are when you answer the question is more important than the actual words that you use in your answer. Ultimately, no matter how they phrase the question, they're trying to find out about these three key areas. They want to know who you are as that person, as a team member, as a teacher, an educator, as a representative to the community. They want to know what you can actually do for them. So what are your points of difference? What makes you stand out from the classmates and the other applicants that are applying for this role? And why do you want to work at our school? What is it about our school, our way of doing things, our community, our values that appeals to you? So absolutely crucial that you get that across clearly during the interview. If you're not sure what's behind what they're asking, just have a bit of a think and see if you can link it back to one of these three areas. They might even ask you a question that might seem a bit odd or unusual or a bit random. Chances are you can still link it back to one of these and it will give you a better idea of how to approach your answer. Generally, when you get towards the end of the interview, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask your own questions. They'll usually say something like, okay, that's all the questions that we have for you today. Do you have any questions for us? The only really bad response to that is to say no, because it can imply that perhaps you're a bit closed off, that perhaps you're not that engaged and interested in the role after all. Because if you were, they would expect that you would really want to know about the reality of that role and how that would impact on you on a daily basis. So these kinds of questions that are up on the screen at the moment are a good place to start, depending on the school, what you already know about them, where the conversation has gone. I would strongly suggest preparing your questions in advance. I have mine written down, not in handwriting because my handwriting stinks and it's not going to add to the positive and professional impression that I'm wanting to make through the interview. So I have mine entered in the computer and printed out. So when they get to that point in the interview and say, so have you got any questions for us? I pull out my piece of paper and I go, yes, I do. And I start working through my list. I usually have 4 or 5 that I have ready to go. And that way it's a bit of insurance in case they've answered some of them during the interview already. It's also insurance against the possibility that I've forgotten everything that seemed like a good idea at 8 o'clock the previous evening. After 40 minutes of intensive concentration in an interview, then the chances are that that's now but a distant memory. So it's insurance against that as well. It could be that they have already answered some of the questions that you've prepared. So that's cool. They might have answered all of them, in which case you can still pull out your piece of paper and say, well, yes, I did have some questions to ask, but you've answered most of them already during the interview. Thank you. But I was really interested in what you're saying before about such and such. Could you tell me a bit more about that, please? So you can usually pick up on something. But if you've prepared about 5 already, I think you'd have to be very unlucky for them to have answered all of them. So typical questions, yeah, average class sizes, what kind of resources can the school offer to a beginning teacher? Bear in mind that they are required to offer a certain level of support. It's one of the requirements that they're measurable against to the ministry, but how they interpret that, some of the extra support will vary a little bit from school to school. You could ask them what their vision is for the school, where they see that going over the next few years. You could perhaps ask what opportunities there might be to be involved in the wider school, what committees you could contribute to, that type of thing. And also what professional development opportunities there might be available for you ongoing as your career unfolds. So the interview itself, yeah, as we said, that first impression is important. So be punctual, be on time. I actually worked with a student today who'd completely forgotten that he had an interview earlier in the afternoon, which was a bit unfortunate for him. Fortunately, it wasn't a job within his particular discipline, so that the rumour mill and the word of mouth wouldn't be too negative for him. It was in an unrelated area, but it's still not a very good look and not professional. And turning up late is almost as bad. So make sure that you've timetabled it, you're allowed enough time, you haven't left things to the last minute, and you're there on time. What that means is not on the dot if it's at 2 o'clock, but instead turning up at maybe 10 to, so that you've got enough time to comfortably find your way to the right place. You've got enough time perhaps to go to the bathroom and check your appearance at the last minute, and enough time to sit comfortably in the waiting area and get into your full state of readiness so that you can perform to your best. We talked about all the grooming. And think about that initial greeting. Okay, that's all part of that first few seconds. So a good firm handshake as you enter the room. COVID restrictions allowing, of course. So if we are in some other kind of alert level at that point, make sure that you're aware of and responding appropriately to that. But in the normal course, yeah, walking in confidently, good firm handshake, eye contact and a nice warm smile. Use their name and names if you have them, so that first impression is ticking off really, really well. Mostly if you make a good first impression, they already like you, then they're probably going to give you a little bit more leeway if you stumble over the odd word as the interview starts to unfold. If you make a poor first impression for whatever reason, then you're always playing catch up, and you're not going to feel as confident about it probably. So try and start off on the right note. It will just make things a lot easier and give you an added boost of confidence as you kick into things. Also, as I said earlier, hey, who doesn't feel nervous for an interview? Most people do, but often we're told that that's a bad thing and that we should hide that because it shows a lack of confidence. I disagree. I think it shows you're human. And I worked with a student some time ago who shared a story with me about her flatmate. Her flatmate had an interview which she thought had gone quite well, but she was a bit disappointed to get the phone call saying, sorry, you've missed out. But they did offer her some feedback. So she thought, well, okay, that would be useful. Let's hear it. She was a bit surprised with what they said, because what the feedback amounted to was that they felt that she wasn't nervous enough. How is that a problem? Well, they felt that there were other candidates that perhaps wanted the job more because they were a bit nervous. They tripped over the odd word. Their passion was a bit more obvious. So when they don't know anything else about you and they're weighing up to see who is going to be the best fit, one of the deciding factors might be who wants the job the most if everybody looks fairly similar. So don't worry about the nerves. Okay, it's normal, and it can be a positive thing because it shows that you're keen, that you're emotionally invested in it, that you've got something at stake and you really want the job. The trick is making sure that those nerves don't interfere with your performance. So for lots of tricks with that, you can try some deep breathing, calming breaths, other relaxation techniques, perhaps when you're waiting just before the interview or as you're walking across from the car to the interview room. Whatever works for you, okay? Bear in mind that they've probably got more at stake than you do. So as a new graduate, your employment situation is typically you don't yet have a job. Yeah. So what's the worst that can possibly happen by the end of the interview? You still don't have a job. So nothing's actually physically changed with that. You're still in the same situation. Sure, you've missed out on an opportunity and your confidence, your self-esteem have taken a bit of a hit, but you're young and resilient. You will recover. On the other hand, what happens if the principal, the school, the other people involved in the decision making perhaps make a poor choice and hire somebody who ends up doing things that bring the school into disrepute, yeah, perhaps have a negative impact on individual students, break up the harmonious vibes in the existing staff team, all of that kind of stuff, because that's going to reflect negatively, not just on the school, but possibly on the person that was involved or the people that were involved in that decision making as well. So they've got more at stake. They've got more to lose than you do. So they're the ones that should be feeling nervous. Your job is to help them to make a good decision that they can feel confident and safe in, hopefully by hiring you. A couple of other little simple things. Make sure that you communicate clearly with them. Generally, Kiwis speak quite quickly, even normally. When we're in an interview, we're nervous, so we tend to speak even faster as that adrenaline kicks in. So make a conscious effort to slow down a little bit and you'll probably come across about right. It will average out. If you're not sure what they've said, make sure you ask them to repeat it or clarify it. Sorry, I'm not quite sure what you meant by that question. Would you mind rephrasing it for me, please? It sounds like you want me to talk about this. Is that correct? So just make sure that that communication is happening well. Maintain good eye contact. So usually we would be aiming for somewhere between 60 and 80% of the time eye contact, which is quite high, but that's kind of the norm for a New Zealand business situation and probably an expectation in a professional interview in a school setting. Don't waffle, keep to those few key points that you identified earlier and make sure you make them well with good evidence. As I mentioned before, don't be afraid to ask for clarification of a question if you're unsure. It's just good communication. Consider your body language too. Don't overthink it, but just make sure you're sitting in a way which is professional, shows a bit of enthusiasm, maybe leaning forward slightly with your hands clasped in front of you on the table, feet flat on the floor so they can't fall any further or make a clunk, that type of thing. Bear in mind that body language is not just a weapon that can be used against you, but it's also a tool that you can use to assess how the interview is going. So if they're leaning forward attentively as you're talking and making little encouraging murmurs and noises like, oh, yeah, then you know that they're interested and you've got them. So I would keep talking about whatever you've just been saying. If they're starting to sit back and look out the window, maybe looking at their phone, maybe starting to make some notes or doodle about something else, then you've probably got about 10 seconds to get their attention back and you need to do something different in order to do that. So it can be a useful tool. As you get towards the interview, you don't need to be a passive participant in that wrapping up process. So you could be more actively involved and ask them things like, hey, what's the next step in the recruitment process? When would you need the successful applicant to start? Those types of things. Not part of your 4 or 5 main questions, but just that conversational wrapping up the interview type style. Always make sure that you thank them for their time. And if you can, find a way of reinforcing your enthusiasm for the role. And another wee thought just to leave with you there is that principals, teachers, other members of staff within a school, they're not HR professionals. Some of them may have had a bit of experience interviewing, but they're not professional interviewers, so they might not be that good at it. And if you're getting a sense that perhaps that's the case and that the interview isn't really unfolding in a very positive way, then you might find that you might need to answer a bit more fully or perhaps even start almost to interview yourself. So you might start using phrases like, once you've given your answer, you could say, oh, and it'd probably be helpful for you to also know about this, or I suppose you'd also want to know about that. And so you can start perhaps adding a little bit of extra value if you think it's appropriate, only if. You don't want to over answer either if they are onto it. But if, as the interview is unfolding, you're starting to get the vibes that, yeah, actually they're not really asking the questions they need to if they want to find out whether I'm the right person or not, then you can perhaps help them a little bit. And after the interview, first of all, you'll be breathing a huge sigh of relief as you leave because it's over. But and you'll probably want to, I guess, reward yourself with going to your favorite cafe or getting your favorite coffee or maybe something stronger if necessary. But make sure that while it's still fresh in your mind, you actually make and take the time to review what went well, what didn't go so well. Think about those, oh, I should have said that moments, because there will always be some, and write them down. So it's not just for your interview with the next school. It could be that actually you did a bit better than you thought, and they invite you back for a second interview. Or maybe there's two of you that are very similar and they're inviting you both back so that they can ask a few more questions to differentiate you and find out who would actually be the best match. So if you're clear on perhaps those areas you could have improved on, then you can go back armed with a bit more evidence, perhaps a different story, a different approach that might tip the balance in your favor potentially. If you are unsuccessful, then hey, that happens. And it's a shame, but hey, it can't get any worse with this particular job. So you may as well ask them for feedback and see if you can get some tips that might help you to present a stronger case next time around. And ultimately, as with anything, you can't perform on the day unless you've done your preparation and practice first. So prepare and practice if you want to perform. To help with that, we've got a whole lot of resources available to you. We've got our guide to job hunting booklet, which looks like this, if you can see that on screen. This all is available in PDF form on our website, which you can access by going to canterbury.ac.nz and putting a /careers on the end of it, as is on the screen at the moment. That will get you to the careers section of the website. And if you then go into resources, you'll find the guide to job hunting in there. That has a specific section in there on preparing CVs for teachers, which I'll talk about, we'll have talked about in the CV session as well. And also a good section on interviews in general. We have a lot of other resources available too. So from that resource section, if you go onto our online tools, our online resources, then there are literally thousands of tools and resources available on there, which are a bit more interesting than a simple PDF of a handout or a brochure. And that includes things like a CV builder, an automated CV checker that runs it through 58 different checks, and also an interview simulator that we call Interview 360. And going into that is a really good idea. Basically, it's got some artificial intelligence built into it, so it's quite smart. There's a database of questions that it can choose from to fire at you randomly, or you can select the type of interview that you want it to ask you, the type of questions you want it to ask. You record your answers to camera, and it gives feedback on that as well. The questions aren't specific to teaching, but there will be a lot of questions in that database that will come up in a teaching interview. Now, it's also looking at you with that AI through the camera as you record your answer. So it's giving you feedback on whether you're making enough eye contact with the camera. It's giving feedback on whether you're appropriately centered in the screen. It's giving feedback on your speech, the pace of your speech, whether you're too fast, whether you're too slow, whether you're using too many fillers, ums, ahs, and ers. It's also giving feedback on quite clever things. So we'll look at your range of facial expressions and emotion and tell you if you're too smiley or not enough, okay? So all those things that make us feel a bit uncomfortable when you're getting the feedback from a real person, you can get that feedback through the bot in a less challenging and slightly more comfortable way. And it's just great practice to have a look at how you come across to others when you look at what's being recorded on the camera. First few times you do it will be a bit of a cringe, but then you'll find it will be a very useful exercise. Lastly, if you would like to talk to us, if you have any questions about your CV, about your cover letter, about your general application process, or specifically about interviews, you can make an appointment to come in and meet with us. We're available all the usual times. We're physically located in level 1 of what's now called the Jane Soons building, used to be called the Geography building, but it's the building that's directly in between Cafe 101 and Rehua. So easy for you guys to find.